Hi, everyone. My name is Megan Lundborg. I am a licensed social worker in the state of North Dakota. My job title is Survivor Leader Advisor, and I am also a certified therapy animal handler. I work out of YouthWorks as well as hold a position on the North Dakota Human Trafficking Task Force. And I am here with Dr. Annalena Lunde, who you already heard from today, but we're going to continue your education.
Thank you. And as Megan nicely introduced me, I'm Dr. Annalena Lunde. I am with the North Dakota Human Trafficking Task Force and also work with YouthWorks as a human trafficking navigator for Western North Dakota. So we're going to start our presentation today and look at some objectives. So when we start out, we're going to now talk about, we've learned about the law, we learned about signs and indicators. Now we're going to focus a little bit more, go into the meat of what is trauma and how it impacts the behavior. We talked about how we need to be very cautious of the behavioral perspective, as well as the components of the environment. You know, how does trauma affect our victims and our clients? We're going to address your role in providing trauma-informed, victim-centered supports. And then we're going to talk about how you should take care of yourself when you're dealing with these clients, because this work is really hard. So this is a quote that I love. The expectation that we can be immersed in suffering and loss daily and not be touched by it is as unrealistic as expecting to be able to walk through water without getting wet. I think you would probably know that very well, Megan.
I would agree.
Yep. So we bear witness to so much in our jobs as healthcare providers, as social workers. This work is tough. It takes its toll. And the education piece of learning how to do this and how to check yourself before you wreck yourself, basically, because this kind of work will bleed into our personal lives. The victims and the clients will also feel this as well. So what we know, you want to just talk about?
Some statistics. I do want to back up and give you a quick disclaimer. I apologize in advance if I say any curse words. It is not meant to offend you. Sometimes it just sort of slips out based on working with young people a majority of my time at work. So 88% of survivors report they have been in contact with a healthcare provider. So that's almost all of them, right? Only 6% of healthcare workers reports treating a victim of human trafficking at some point in their career. So social workers, we don't do a lot of math, but they seem like opposite sides of the spectrum, right? So most social workers are saying they came into contact with healthcare, and healthcare is saying we've only worked with a few.
Right. And so when we mentioned before in the previous presentation, look at the small percentage of ER personnel, because that's one of our main portals of entry. We talked about dental, we talked about OBGYN, all our little clinics. That's a really small number. And for many of us, you know, seeing that, and I made it big on purpose, is we've got to recognize how prevalent not only trafficking and exploitation, but how prevalent is that we aren't educated enough, or we don't know how to treat them or how they present. So in this presentation, we kind of hope to talk a little bit about their story and the life and how we can better spend that time that I mentioned to all of you. We've got to humanize, be more human when we're taking care of these individuals. And Megan has great lived experience in that respect.
So there's a website called The Life Story, and it is put together by survivors of trafficking and exploitation, and it kind of runs through their experience. So a lot of people have questions of how did this happen? What was it like? What happens afterwards? And they've done a beautiful job putting all of that together in a way that doesn't re-exploit them, that allows them to tell their story, because it's important that we're not just asking people to hear their story to hear it and out of curiosity. You have to have a purpose behind the questions you're asking, which we'll dive into a little bit more. And I imagine you heard a little bit about previously. So some survivors' perspective is that there's severe PTSD. So it's complex. It's not just one instance of trauma. It's multiple instances over and over again. More that this survivor, Shelley, wishes all medical providers were trauma informed and they can make assumptions and feels like they're being rude. Now, trauma informed means everybody is trained. So your receptionists, your people answering the phone, your nurses, your doctors, everybody on your site is trained in trauma informed care, because everyone is going to be interacting with these victims.
And as we mentioned, a lot of the people who have control over our victims or our patients that we see use healthcare as a means of control. And remember, it's all psychological. So when we see them in our clinics, in our hospitals, in the doctor's office, they've learned so much of how to survive. So their behavior, how hard it is for us to understand it, is how their survival. That's a survival instinct. So again, it's that different layer as well. So physical injuries often are the reason why we see them in the emergency room or we see them in our clinic. And so, you know, they may present also with a urinary tract infection or some lady problems, as I call it, or some discomfort. We always said we didn't want you to always think trafficking. However, when these are repeat customers or repeat clients, or we see these unusual differential diagnoses, we need to ask those questions because they aren't going to tell you why. They're there because they're a product, like I said before, that needs to be taken care of because maybe somebody's waiting for them. Time is money, right? Yeah, time is money. These are all quotes from the lifestyle.org of true survivors. And I encourage you to watch that video because the language that they use is so powerful. I was in the ER 18 times and no one ever asked me if I was really okay. I don't know if you have any visceral feelings about that, because I do.
Yeah. So I always say when I train that if you take one message from the next 2 hours or however long we're here, it's just be nice. Just be nice. I get the ER. It's a fast-paced environment. You have patients lined up. You got to get from here to there. I do it in crisis intervention work. I get it. But just asking someone if they're okay can break down a whole wall of barriers, because I guarantee you nobody in their life is asking them that.
Yeah. The power of that warm blanket, as I've mentioned before, and that warmer and those graham crackers and peanut butter do wonders to break down that barrier and that concern. Because as we talked about it, and Megan and I will talk a little bit more, and Megan will share some, firsthand experience. The violence that some of these women and men experience is pretty incredible. It's like I said, this is a public health concern now. And so they have to survive, and the only way they can survive is sometimes with the behaviors. I put in some, it's in the news, it's in the media, it's everywhere. And people always ask, why is this something that we have to talk about? We see a lot more with labor trafficking, with sex trafficking, with exploitation. As I mentioned before, some of this is homegrown. Some of this we see here in North Dakota. So it, like I said, it can happen anywhere and everywhere. And so the trauma, this is one of my favorite lines. Trauma, we treat treating the unseen, because again, they're not going to come to you, right, and say, I'm being trafficked. They have to really trust you. They have to really feel safe in order to even disclose. And the goal isn't, again, disclosure.
So it's really similar to victims of domestic violence. So there's a lot of shame, there's a lot of stigma, fear, and that results in silence. So they're not disclosing, like we've mentioned before. An example I like to use is with my mom. So when you go into the ER or and you're in a clinic, they ask the "Are you safe?" questions, right? Are you safe at home? One thing I want to point out to that is, like, what is safe? What does safe mean? So maybe safe is, I didn't get hit today, I only got yelled at, right? That could be safety for somebody. But my mom, she fell down the stairs, like she legitimately fell down the stairs. But she was at the ER and they were asking those questions. And so she came in with my dad, who sat next to her, and they asked her if she was safe at home. Well, let's say my dad is abusing her. He's not. We'll just nope, we're good there. But he's sitting next to her, so she's not going to answer truthfully. And she's saying she fell down the stairs, and no one broke their eyes from the computer to look at her and ask these questions. And now I'll tell you, that doesn't feel warm. That doesn't make me want to tell you anything. And so there's different ways to do that can make someone feel less shameful, less stigmatized, and address some of the fear that they might have.
Yeah. And what the survivor advocate says here is something that, when we do trainings and we talk about it, they've already been conditioned. They may be also have had some criminal activity. So when we become judgmental, again, our nonverbal and our verbal actions, how we position ourselves with the computer to the back asking these questions, the very impersonal piece of it, um, it's going to minimize them. It's going to defeminize them, demasculate. We say it's going to defeminize them too. They're going to feel disgusting, and they're going to be like, you know what, you're right. No, I'm not worth it. And again, we have to treat them all like humans. Oh, so there are so many opportunities that are missed. And I've been doing this work all my life as a nurse, but now as a navigator and working with YouthWorks and with the North Dakota Human Trafficking Task Force. There are many times I'm like, wow, there were so many opportunities I missed. I did pay more attention to the one that didn't look like, a woman of the night. We had all, I work in the ER, so we have the language, right? The implicit bias that I had, again, being now sitting in the back seat and seeing this differently now. We have to treat everyone the same way. We do a great job with domestic violence. We do a great job with child abuse, but we don't do a really good job in trafficking. And there's no best practice. You're the research geek.
I'm working on it. We're learning.
Yeah. So, with rape victims, we have protocols, we have things, just like it says here. If you put me next to somebody who's been raped or somebody who's gone through domestic violence, that person, this is what survivors say, that person will get treated a little bit better than me because I'm dressed this way, not by choice. Not by choice. So, trauma.
So what is it? It's an overwhelming stress that exceeds our ability to cope or integrate emotions connected to an experience. It's acute, chronic, or complex, or it can be a little bit of everything. So earlier when I talked about, I believe it was Shelley talked about her PTSD, it's a complex trauma. So you can have one instance of sexual assault or rape. Our trafficking victims have repeated instances of sexual assault and rape. Trauma is the harmful interruption of safety, dignity, agency, and belonging, which are all fundamental needs that we have as humans. And it can be individual, collective, systemic, intergenerational, and historical. So we talk about generational trauma a lot with our Native American population. And so most of the time, we don't just have one factor. There's the generational trauma, there's complex trauma. There can be a chronic continuance. And so it's a big part that we don't really see that we have to work through.
Absolutely. And I put this slide in for Megan because, she works, her specialty is youth. She does great with adults too, but your problem kids, how they label them.
Yeah.
With child sexual abuse. Childhood sexual abuse can prime girls for future exploitation. So some of this, like, I grew up with it. This was normal to me. So I guess this is what's expected of me. So if they've been exposed to adverse childhood experiences or violence or trauma, and then they've been preyed on for their vulnerabilities, or somebody says, I know that you're not getting love at home, I'll take care of you. And then it just becomes a cycle. And it's just so easy to fall into. So that's their worldview.
I've seen kids that were sexually abused at home, and then they end up trafficked, and their response is, why would I do it for free at home when I can get paid for it out here? So it's the lesser of two evils. Both choices really suck. So which one gets your needs met a little bit different? There's an activity that I learned from another survivor in a training that she has 3 categories up that have characteristics of each. And one is that of a pimp, and one is that of a social worker and being involved in the system, and one is an abusive parent at home that uses substances. And you don't tell people which is which, and you ask them to choose. And 9 out of 10 times people are picking the pimp as grown, educated adults sitting in this training. So imagine being a young person that is being abused at home, looking for love and belonging and getting those needs met as well as their physical needs. So it's really, really common, and it makes them very, very vulnerable and easy targets.
Yeah, and some of the research that we have in this that you'll see throughout the presentations is that sexually abused children are 28 more times likely to be arrested later in their life for quote prostitution than those who were not abused. So that statistic that's out there, again, maybe we're not asking the right questions. Maybe we're not screening properly. Do you feel safe? That may not be the right question. And again, we don't have the silver bullet for this. The trauma is different, right? I mean, it is extremely complex. It's ongoing. A real interesting research by Hopper and Gonzalez, because we did talk about labor trafficking. In labor trafficking, in this research study they surveyed 131 survivors. I know it's a small sample size, but what they saw was that people who were in labor trafficking had higher numbers of just depression. But when you look at sex trafficking, complex trauma, post-traumatic stress disorder, the combination of depression, and there's an ICD-10 diagnosis on that. It's all about the physical coercion. Anything else? The compound.
I think with a lot of the kids that have compound trauma, so going back to the youth, a lot of them have diagnoses of ADHD, oppositional defiance disorder, depression, and anxiety. And I'm not saying they don't have those things because I'm not licensed to diagnose, but a lot of them have really consistent behaviors. And I observe a lot of those things that are very consistent with the complex PTSD as well.
And you see that dysregulation.
Yes.
Too.
Yep. They're very dysregulated. A lot of their behaviors are contributed or in relation to their trauma or triggers or different experiences that they've had. So for example, we have young people, we have a shelter at YouthWorks for under 17. There was a young lady that she wouldn't sleep in the bed. So some people would say she's defiant. She's doing it because you're an adult, you're telling her what to do and she just doesn't want to. You do a little bit further conversing with her and actually build a relationship with her and not just focus on, what's happening. All of her assaults happened in a bed. So she just didn't feel good in a bed. So she slept on the couch and everything was good. No problems. So thinking a little bit deeper into the reasoning behind the behaviors. And sometimes they don't know, right? Sometimes they just act away because it maybe is repressed or something like that. But a lot of times it's linked to an event that we just don't take the time to figure out.
And when you peel back the layers, I'm going to say pre-trafficking, and that's what the research shows and what we see too. When we ask questions or we do screenings of their adverse childhood score, they've been exposed. They have 5 or more when we grade them and all that. They've had childhood abuse. And so that predispositions them to, when they get into the life or get into the violence that they experience, they have almost like a more of an intolerance or tolerance to the sexual abuse because they grew up with it. So why not, be able to go through it? Megan and I love to talk about, the brain, and we both make it really simple, right? You go with your simple and I'll just add to it. You do a good job too.
So my simple part of the brain is you have your reptilian brain, and what's the other one? The other word?
The higher frontal.
You're like mammal brain.
Mammalian.
Yes, that's the one. So you have your part of your brain that is developed really, really early. That is your fight, flight, freeze, and fawn response. So that's the part of your brain that's going to get you out of trouble. And you have it's the first part of your brain to develop. Then you have your brain that can process logic and emotion and decisions. So a lot of our trafficking clients, they live in their reptilian brain. They are constantly in fight, flight, freeze, or fawn mode. So you have your fight, which is like, I'm gonna fight you. You have your freeze, which I'm just going to do what I have to do until this is over. Your flee, which I'm going to get out of here. Or your fawn, which is essentially appeasement. So you will do anything to keep the peace, keep people happy. You don't want conflict, which that one is relatively newer and it's becoming more common than it's identified. So Annalena, tell us about the science behind that. That's just where I live. I live in the explaining what happened, and a lot of our sexual assault victims will say why didn't I leave?
Right.
And explaining to them your brain decided for you what was going to keep you alive. So how does your brain decide that?
Well, the brain responds to stimulus, and you all know this. You're probably have had some neurology, people who specialize in neurology. And so I call it the downstairs brain, her reptilian brain, and the upstairs brain, right? And this is all higher functioning. She and I both attended a training where they talked about the amygdala. And the amygdala is the size of a almond. I said walnut earlier, but almond, but it's small. But it's just that file cabinet, right? Mm-hmm. And whenever it's triggered, and sometimes the stimulation, whether it's a bad memory or a good memory, that's where all that the toxins, either the good toxins or the bad toxins, get secreted. Mostly the bad toxins. And stress, we know, is bad, right? It makes us fat, it makes us skinny, it makes us have bad hair, whatever, lose hair, whatnot. But the brain architecture, the way the brain is functioning, and I love this. This is my favorite chalkboard thing, is that we go from down to up, and wherever the trauma happened is where the brain kind of like, oh, I live here. This is where I'm at. And then that little almond / walnut, however big your amygdala, gets a little hot. I love that hot A. And then, we can't get past doing the higher level stuff. And that's okay. And that's a lot of the training. We have to understand that the behavior is a survival thing. And I, as a clinician, I was like, what? And then when I started working with them, I'm like, oh my God, totally. This is a behavior thing. This is how they know how to cope, survive.
Yep. A lot of them live in hypervigilance. So when we look at adults and we're like, you're behaving like a 12-year-old, well, when did their trauma happen? Yep. What part of their brain are they living in? With my experience, parts of me live in fight, flight, freeze. I've been out of the life long enough that my brain has started to, repair itself, because they're amazing. But I still live in a place that I have to know all my exits of my room, because I have to know how to get out of a situation. And so when you're in an office with a patient or something, and they need to see their door, or they can't have their back to you, or you turn in a way where they can't see your face, those are all things that can be connected to their trauma and to where their brain lives.
Yeah, because as I mentioned, and what she's saying is so true, when we talked about it earlier, the triggers, it may not that you're doing it intentionally. It's just that what they remember and what they felt and what they smelled, everything, all of their senses jacked up. And so how they function, like I told you about the 30-year-old who was diagnosed at 7 years old with having stuff, and she was sold when she was younger. She remembers that. She's a 30-some-year-old acting like a 7 to 10-year-old sometimes. And it's frustrating as us as providers, taking that step back and saying, maybe I need to ask the question. Maybe I need to understand a little more, because this is part of our training. We all know this. Lifespan impacts of adverse childhood experiences. Everyone knows the Felitti study, and how, ACEs became such a prevalent piece of how we do assessments and how we diagnose or treat. Adverse childhood experiences, when you look at all this, they produce toxic stress, and they affect different parts of how our brain develops, how we see things, our perspective. Toxic stress can inhibit the ability to figure out what's good or bad, right? What I think is good may not be so good for some of our clients, right? That toxicity and the brain being damaged the way it is, or hurt this way it is, can affect their decision making. Mm-hmm. Else you think oh, you're good, because you like this one.
So trauma in the brain specific to adolescents. So kids run away, and they run to something or from something. And what we found is, so if Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? You need to meet your basic needs, and then you go up the triangle. Well, kids are running from safe places where their basic needs are met. Why are they running there? Why are they leaving that? Their brain, they're in the Erikson stage of development, where they're looking for their identity, right? So they want to go somewhere where they feel like they belong, where they have an identity, where people like them. So unfortunately, that makes them even more of a target and vulnerable for exploiters or traffickers. And so they're leaving those situations. It's inherent as a human to want to belong. When we were hunters and gatherers way back when, if we didn't fit in, we died, right? Because we were alone in the wilderness, and bears and lions and tigers, oh my. And so we want to fit in, and we want to belong. Now take an adult that is stuck, their brain is an adolescent brain, they still want to belong. I am 30, almost 31, but my brain still sometimes lives in the 12-year-old when my trauma started. And so sometimes I just really want people to like me. And I fight for that. And it's not always the most logical decision, but that's where our adolescents live. Then add in, they're probably experimenting with substances, there's drug use, there's all of those things. So they don't have the ability to see long term. So a lot of my kids will call me and they'll want to make a decision and it's very impulsive. And I recognize that and they don't. And so we stop and we talk about what is A through Z. Like we're at AB right now and that's great. And I'm glad you're thinking and excited about something, but let's process. So what happens when you run away? Well, A, B, and C. Okay, and what do those things feel like? And we process just one step further. Their brains can't do that on their own. And so it's really easy to get mad at them because they make stupid decisions and that was so dumb what you did. But keep in mind the science behind it. I'm not saying kids don't still just do dumb stuff to do dumb stuff because they do, but there's bigger pieces there.
Yeah, and then also think about, North Dakota is becoming now a place where our foreign-born individuals come. Life has changed here. It's not the typical white Anglo, white. You have also people from different cultures. I'm from a different culture. So imagine if they're a victim of trafficking or exploitation, they have so much compound trauma from migrating. Let's say I'm from Panama, so maybe they crossed the border, having to go through the river, or maybe they came by plane. However, that trauma, assimilating the culture, the United States culture, or wherever they're from, there's so much trauma there, and who knows what they experienced to get here. We talked a little bit about, well, you're in a better country, so deal with it. No, you've got to understand that you have that consideration also, because they're trying to fit in the language and everything like that makes them even more vulnerable. And the trauma can even be as complex as what Megan mentioned.
And for both adults and adolescents, their determination of safety is different than yours and my determination of safety. So being around drugs and needles and things like that might be a norm to them. And so not throwing a needle into a sharps container is like, whatever, seeing needle, they see that all the time. So being mindful that what is normalized for them versus what is safe and unsafe.
Yeah. And, we talked about during a medical exam, some of the concerning signs, like, how their affect and the behavior may be. Like the one client I had who all of a sudden went limp. That was new to me, and ended up being, she was a victim. The effects of trauma are so big and so worldwide. They may, though, and Megan just did a training. She just told me she did a training with law enforcement. Law enforcement loves to get all the information, and we like to get all the information as well, from a healthcare provider, because we got to check those boxes, right? But someone who's gone through trauma, be it a car accident, whatever, their brain's going to go back to what she said, the reptilian or the downstairs brain. And so time and detail may not be what we expect it to be. And it's frustrating.
Yeah. I explain it like this. One of my first colleagues that really started some of the anti-trafficking movements in North Dakota, she explained it as your brain is a puzzle, and then a brain with trauma, you like hit the puzzle from the bottom. So there's pieces all over and you're trying to put them back together. I've been doing this work for 6 years. Probably about 2 years in, I started telling my story and my experience. And to this day, I don't think I've ever told it the same. It changes every time. I forget stuff. I go back and forth. And add into that, like feeling like you don't remember your own story, what that feels like for somebody. People think I'm lying because I don't know what I'm talking about. Did I make it up? Am I crazy? Those are all thoughts that I still feel, that I'm like, oh my God, is this real life? And having people that believe you to corroborate that for you can make a huge difference in your recovery.
Yeah. And that's why victims will appear so differently from what we expect. And this, this is lifelong trauma, being pre-trafficking all the way to what we're talking about, trafficking and exploitation. So they may have had negative experiences. The survivor mechanisms is, for me, this is the big one. The aha moment was their behavior. And they're guided and they're guarded and they're told that they're not worth anything. And you know, you can't go to the square world. You know, you talked about the square world. They know, they go back sometimes. That's the big barrier, is sometimes they go back because they know what to expect. And so survival is huge. And so that's why you have people that, you know, when we Monday night quarterback it, as I mentioned it before, why are you going back? Why are you in this? We're so judgy sometimes in our profession, unfortunately, because we know what's right. But again, what she says, they can't appraise, they can't see things the same way we see it because of all their exposure to trauma.
I like to reframe it. So reframe in your brain, instead of why do they keep going back or why don't they leave, reframe it as to what keeps them there. Is there something there that keeps them there? Whether it's a comfort, whether it's substance use, whether it's the relationship, there's a reason that they stay there, despite all logic in our brains of like, it's so messed up, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. And so you're going to see a slide that I have that's going to say it all. Because as healers that we are, as clinicians that we are, we see a problem, we want to fix it, right? We see a gash, we want to sew it up. Good, get your antibiotics and whatnot. This, not so much. It's going to be frustrating. A colleague always says to me, the success comes in the intervention, not the outcome. And I've been saying that to some people who are all about outcomes. And I'm like, you know what? Were you nice to that person? Did you offer them a blanket or some graham crackers and peanut butter? Did you take time? Did you sit down? Did you ask them if they wanted to change of clothes? And they're like, that's a good advice. So I want you just to reflect, if we were in an audience, we talk about this, but think about some of your patients and clients that you've had, you know, what behaviors now that you've learned and become kind of educated, and you're still becoming, you know, still learning, have you noticed something that you've done to trigger a patient? Because these are my aha moments that I've had in my life. Yeah, just think about it. And don't feel bad that you missed it. Don't, because they'll come back. They will come back, or you'll be a better person the next time you have an interaction with the patient. So we're gonna give you, again, Megan and I are not the experts. Megan has a ton of experience, you know, as she's mentioned, as through a lived experience perspective, but we want to give you some guides. There's no one shoe fits all, right? No size fits all. And the one thing, this is my favorite slide that I always include with healthcare, is we always want to rescue, right? And that has been a humbling experience for me in this work, is that I can't fix it. It's so frustrating. And I feel like a failure, and I need therapy and all those kind of things, because I can't, you know, save everybody. That's not the goal.
I'll also tell you a secret. They don't want to be rescued or be saved. They need to do it themselves.
Yep.
You can't do it.
Yep. And so when we look at, so I know many healthcare providers, we like protocols, we like something to give us an idea to beef up and improve the way we do things. The National Association of Pediatric Nurse Practitioners has, and it's KNAP, I mean, many of you know, there is a phenomenal online core competency modules that you can do. There's 6 modules that you go through, from universal, you know how we have our universal precautions and all that, universal competency, how you have a trauma-informed approach, all the way to prevention, which I think it should be flipped, prevention first and then everything else. But these competencies, you can go to the napap.org and do this. It's free. I love the fact that they put disclosure is not the goal. It's all about prevention. And as I mentioned before, public health strategy. I don't know how you feel about this, but I love the, you know, looking at the needs, patient-centered care, just again, taking an extra 5 or 10 minutes, or even that 1 minute will make a huge difference.
I'll tell you, survivors they're not remembering the social workers that put all that, like, oh, they got me to treatment and they got me here and they got me there and they got me there. They're remembering the people that were nice to them, that took the extra 5 minutes to say, like, are you okay? How are you doing? And I'm not telling you that just because you do that, they're going to be like, oh, you're amazing. And they're going to be nice to you. They might still tell you to screw off and kick dirt. It's possible, but they will remember.
Oh, definitely. I found this, and Dr. Hani Stokesy, I've had the privilege of working with her on HEAL. And when I was putting this presentation together, she said, just make sure that people understand. And it's kind of what Megan and I are saying. The goal is to have an informative, to be normalized, right? Understand that developmentally, they may not be where they need to be. And Megan's talked about that. Creating conversation with your patient. And I have a picture of her that she let me use at eye level. I mean, it's just the basic stuff that we learn in 101 class, right? Creating context so that they can share their experiences.
Mhm.
I mean, I'm sure you can endorse that.
I endorse it. Thumbs
Yeah,
up.
yeah. And so when I look at ways, people are always asking, I need a good screening tool. How many times do they ask us that?
Every time.
Every single time. What's the best indicator? I look at, this is just me. I think there should be a hybrid way. And this is just me as a healthcare person. Visual indicators, right? Look, listen, feel, use all your stuff, and then ask questions, open and close questions. They don't see themselves as victims. I mean, you can talk to that for this, forever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If someone would have told me I was a victim, actually they did. I went through domestic violence court, and that was the reason I didn't follow through with domestic violence court, was because they said I was a victim. They told me to make a safety plan. And what I will tell you is, if you have to make a safety plan before someone leaves your office, make it a realistic safety plan. Mine was, you're going to call someone for help that's in your family. Well, I wasn't speaking to my family at that time, and I didn't have a phone. You're going to leave and find the closest exit. Well, last time I got locked in the bathroom and there's no windows. So making it realistic, chances are they're going to leave and they're going to go back to the life. So we talk about a harm reduction approach. How do they stay in it, but do accrue the least amount of harm? So whether that's the safe needle exchange, safe sex kits, things like that.
Yeah. So when you look at your hybrid, so knowing all that, you may have a 5 minute, a 10 minute, I hope we don't spend just 5 minutes with our patients, but if you've got a small amount of time, it's looking at some of the visual stuff that we've talked about, but asking them question, how are you feeling? Is everything okay? When was the last time you ate something? Just basic stuff. They'll be like, hey, they asked me how I felt. They asked me how I was doing. Okay, I'm going to go back. But then maybe after the 20th time, or maybe after a couple of years, they may come back and they'll be like, I remember you were so nice to me. Again, it's the golden rule. So there are different cool theories out there for all of you to look at. These are some of the treatment and modalities that I practiced as a nurse and didn't really know the fancy terms because I think I fell asleep during that class. But then in YouthWorks, having the opportunity to work with them, I'm a graduate of them. There's 3 different ways that they approach their interactions. And this is what I'm taking now to healthcare. I'm like, hey, there are 3 approaches that we probably learned in class that could help having those contextual conversations that we learned in school and med school and nursing school that we kind of forgot, or because we're so about getting them in, getting them out. So person-centered trauma. Oops. Yes, person-centered trauma. Thank you.
So this was first used when treating Holocaust survivors. It's a way of providing care to people in which the unique person and their individual strengths, preferences, and needs are emphasized. So we're not treating people as a whole, like as a whole person, but we're not saying you were trafficked, so what worked for that trafficked person is going to work for all trafficked people, right? We're letting individuals decide their own recovery process and their own what's going to work for them. It focuses on who they are first and then incorporates the rest of the practice. So I will talk about youth because that's who I primarily work with, but they are the leaders in their own life. I don't decide. They know themselves better than I do. I can have all this fancy education and theories and all of these things, but they know who they are and they know what they want. Sometimes they might, fill you full of smoke and tell you, yeah, my goal is to be a stripper, which they've told me, and telling them, like, I know that's not your actual goal. Like, what is it? And they'll, go down that rabbit hole with you. But it's really person-centered trauma informed is that they are the leaders, they identify what they want, and we are not deciding that. Do you think it's more successful if I decide what you should do or if you decide what you should do, right?
Yeah, it's you're creating safety, you're creating choice, you're creating trustworthiness. Again, these theories and modalities, these three that we're talking about, there's so many out there, but these are the ones that kind of open the door, basically open the door and helps them, because eventually we're going to have to break that umbilical cord and they're going to have to go into the community, right? And they can always come back if they need assistance, but how do we give them that choice to be a collaborative partner in their care? And that's something that we learn in healthcare all the time about that. Unconditional positive regard, it's the Rogerian theory. It's caring and acceptance. It's when I talk to forensic nurses, because as I mentioned before, rape doesn't happen between the hours of 9 to 5, right? And our repeat customers or clients that come in, they don't usually come during the day, they come at night. And so when they start coming in, the first thing we'll do is roll our eyes and be like, oh my gosh. The attitude we should have with all of our patients is like, hey, glad you came back. What's up? What's going on? It's always giving them value. I'm glad to see you. When we have youth that have run away, or they've come back, or adults that come back, they'll be like, oh, you're going to be so disappointed in me. And I'm like, I don't care. I'm glad to see you. I'm glad that you're okay. And they're like, oh, okay. Because they're so ashamed and they feel guilt, right?
Yep.
In that respect. And Rogers was pretty smart in that respect. People have a need for self-worth. I do. I know I do. As Megan says, she always wants to be liked. I want to be liked too. But there are people who are not going to like me. But that's okay though. I need to figure out who I am and what I can do and what I offer, and be okay with who I am and what I can offer. I don't know if there's anything.
No, this is my favorite one.
Yeah,
it's the just be nice to people theory.
Yeah, that golden rule, self-actualization, getting them up. Strength-based solution. I thought I'd never heard of this before, and I teach nursing students, undergrads, and I was like, oh my God, we do this in nursing school. This approach, basically, it's not always about the positive things. When I saw this, I was like, oh, I got to pick up all the positive stuff. No, it's about teaching them to be respectful to again, self-value. Again, it's kind of like almost like a mesh of Rogerian and patient-centered and the unconditional positive regard. It's not about minimizing the stuff, they've got to take accountability, but we got to teach them. We got to show them, give them some balance. That's why I picked that picture. Identifying what's happening at that moment. How do you learn? And how can we help you get to the next level? Don't give them these big, things to accomplish. What can we do right now? What can you control right now? I sound like my therapist. What is it that you have right now that you can do to help you be a better person? Anything else?
I think I do it with my young people because they see themselves very negatively. I shoplift, I sell drugs, I do all these things, and we do what is called their positive hustle plan. So we take those things and identify the skills that come with that. So you must be a really good salesman. You know how to network, how to create relationships with people, and you can do math. So all of those pieces that we can take a negative thing and make it strength-based.
It's and positive. Like I can't do percentages to save my life, but if I have to figure out 25% off of a sale for a shoe, I can totally do that. My husband always laughs at me and I'm like, I wonder why I can't do that all the time. But if I put it in a context that I understand shopping, yeah, I can do math. So I'm sure many of you can identify with that. So I know that there's a tool. Everybody wants a tool. Everyone wants a tool. Heal Trafficking has, and you can go to the Heal Trafficking website, and Dignity Health out in California, out west, uses this, and they have a really good protocol. They have separation protocols. They're one of the leaders and share their practice is the PAIR tool. And the PAIR tool, as you're looking at it, has 4 pillars: to provide, to educate, ask, react, and respond. When you look at this is just a universal education approach. I've had some physicians say, well, it doesn't tell me exactly what to do. Actually, it does. It builds upon what you already know. Okay. It's asking questions, it's establishing rapport, it's providing people with resources, it's being non-judgmental, it's meeting them where they're at. It's a culturally sensitive approach to how we should care for our clients, how we should talk to our clients. And sometimes they're going to tell you to go pound sand and say, I just need my meds and I need to go. Or they may come back and be like, so last time you asked me how I was doing and if I was okay, wow, that meant a lot. I'm not feeling good. And here's why. This is just a foundation, a great approach to look at the way of how we respond at bedside. And I told you all we need to bring kindness and quality back to bedside. This approach is the pair approach, which is really great. And you develop these approaches yourself from a multicultural perspective. You like this approach? Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very victim centered. These are some very useful interventions that I've watched the organization YouthWorks use with their clients, which I've used with my adults as well, even at home. These are very useful. Do you want to just?
Yeah, so mirroring is when you're going to match their body language. I always talk about if my kid is sitting on the floor, I'm not going to sit in like a bar stool because then we're creating a power imbalance, right? So mirroring their body language. Are they sitting with their legs crossed? Are they sitting with their feet on the ground? I sit crisscross applesauce all the time. It makes me less threatening. So what is your body language doing? How are they sitting? How are you sitting? I get you have to be professional and there's boundaries and protocols within that. But it's just an idea, even as far as like crossing your arms, that's really closed off. I do it when I'm cold, but just being aware of that. Active listening. So listening and responding effectively. So saying what you hear. So what I hear you say, and then sometimes they're like, no, that's not what I said. And you're like, oh, okay. It super is though. But it gives them a chance to hear like how they sound or what they're saying. And if that's in line with what their intention really is, and then matching. If they're talking really, really soft, I'm not going to shout at them because they're down here. So why am I up here? Now, that doesn't mean if someone starts screaming at you, you scream back, because that's just going to escalate the situation. But it's more so if they're really soft spoken, talking really loudly isn't going to be helpful in that conversation.
Yeah, because they may even be conditioned to talk that way. They may have, that's maybe how they kept a survivor thing as well. So when we're looking at best practice, what's the best thing? You know, the pair approaches is a great universal educational approach to how we do things. It's being intentional in every single thing you do. As Megan said earlier, what does it feel like? Just flip the scenario. What would it feel like to be a client here? So think about your practice, think about your clinic, think about the hospital. Are people trained? Obviously, we're doing the training because we need more. There isn't enough training and education out there. Support staff, I think that's super important. I've been on the other side as a patient, and if I'm treated like poop, I don't want to, I get angry and I probably act out. Most definitely act out. Maybe I'm a nurse and I'm highly educated, but when something's happening in my life, I lose it. I totally lose it. I do it with my animals and I do it with my family members. So treat me like a daughter, treat me like a wife, treat this person like a human being, no matter what they look like or smell like. Your paperwork and intake, I know that's a good one for you.
So when you are giving paperwork, just handing it and saying, fill this out and then walking away is intimidating, it's confusing, and it's not best practice or trauma informed. So explaining what the questions are for, why they're on there, and what the purpose is and who will see them can be really useful and important for your, well, not just trafficking clients, like that's important to, I think most people is like, you're not going to post, like HIPAA's a thing, I get that, but like, you're not going to post this on your personal Facebook, right? Why do you need to know how much I weighed when I was 4 years old? I don't think that's a real thing, but just explaining why those things are there. If I come into the clinic and you just hand me a sheet of paper and are like, why are you here? I'm like, oh, should I not be here?
Mhm.
Should I be somewhere else? Those are things that come up. So, and that's why it's also important that your intake, like your front desk people, your
Mhm.
receptionists, all of them are trained. Some of these questions can feel really violating to survivors of trafficking or someone that's been exploited. It can be overwhelming as well. So just being mindful of that when you're handing out paperwork. And if they're leaving things blank, there could be a reason. They also might not know.
Yeah. And many of these clients, I'm not going to say all of them, but I'm going to say a big percentage, you might know more percentage, need some sort of mental health support. You don't know, you need to meet them where they're at, and we don't know where they're at. And so we make a lot of assumptions. So when we're like, I need to ask you some questions, I mean, just our tone, just the way we stand goes a long way. So every interaction, every human contact, try to make it as positive as whatever. You don't need to invite them over for dinner. You definitely, we came into this profession as social workers, as healthcare providers. Why we're doing this is because we wanted to heal and make a difference. This is a privilege to see people at their worst. That's how I look at the work I do now. I am privileged enough to help you and see you at your worst to get you back to where you should be or could be. So if you have that mentality, and I know it's a culture change, it will be a big deal. This is Dr. Hani Stoki. She gave me permission, but look at her. She's an ER physician in a huge hospital. Look at how she looks, where she's at, how she's, looking at the patient, intentionally, being intentional in her interaction. It's just a snapshot, but again, it kind of ties in. So how are you doing it? Are you triaging or looking at your patient from a door? I've had physicians do that. I'm like, get in here, or have I been turning my back? I don't know if you've ever had experience with the medical profession. Just the way we do our regular duties that we don't think of could be interpreted.
Yeah. And I think intentionality comes to what you wear also. Like I get the scrubs thing. But notice how people that work in pediatrics will usually have like fun characters or fun scrubs. Your receptionist, your front desk people, like if I am homeless and it's taken everything and I have to come into the clinic, or I am dressed like your stereotypical lady of the night, and you are in this professional suit, there's a power imbalance just in our clothing. So I understand protocols and dress codes and things like that, but just something to think about, sticking your bank up here.
Oh yeah. So as a forensic nurse, sometimes I have to wear a lab coat. We've done away with our lab coats. I tell everybody wear jeans, not with holes, don't show your area, blah, blah, blah. But just look clean, or put on a jacket and steel toe shoes, because we have patients, try to go at our feet, but making yourself approachable. Dr. Hani has to wear a certain outfit, but her way of being normal is sitting down. She makes it a point to sit down and puts a clipboard and I spend at least 5 minutes saying, hi, have you eaten yet? Are you okay? What brought you in? I'm here. Just a couple of questions just to say, all right, this doc seems okay. Very simple stuff. So we've talked about the trauma. We talked about all this work, and some of you in the audience might be burned out and saying, this is it, I'm over it. And maybe this stuff is really hard. Megan, you've done a good job in not cussing or anything.
I haven't done it.
And so as a flight nurse and an ER nurse and the nursing I do now, I cuss, I get angry, I do some things that probably are inappropriate. Well, they are inappropriate. So we're going to talk about how do you, as a healthcare professional, how can you take care of these clients and do all the stuff that we told you that we suggested? Be Rogerian, be unconditional positive guard, be whatever, be trauma informed, whatever. We're going to talk about secondary trauma, and I've had it. I'm proud to say it. I wear it as a badge. Okay. It is hard work. I don't have very good boundaries. My self-care is not the best that it should be. I am a workaholic, and that's the way that I deal with my trauma. It took me 30 some years to figure that out, but that's why I went into critical care nursing and adrenaline stuff that I do now. So I'm trying to take those behaviors and making them more healthy, making better choices, to even drinking more water and less coffee, which is hard. I don't know, anything else of secondary trauma for you?
No, I'll do it on that one.
Okay, so, but just be cognizant that there's a movie, and I don't remember the movie. It's check yourself before you wreck yourself. I love that line because we don't do a good job. So we're gonna watch a video because we've got time, and I'm gonna just wait for it to click. This is my source of stress right now.
Use the mouse.
Use the mouse. Megan's gonna guide me.
Let's play a little game. We'll play a word association game. I'll say a word and you can picture something in your head. You can even shout it out loud. Are you ready? Cow. Okay, so most of you maybe were thinking this. Maybe a few of you were thinking more this. And maybe some of you thought this. We'll do another one, work. Awesome. So some of you really love your work, like this. Maybe a few of you were thinking this. And I wonder if anyone felt this. We'll do just one more. PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder. So most of you thought this. Maybe a few of you were thinking this. But I wonder if anyone thought this. Compassion fatigue is the post-traumatic stress disorder related symptoms that you receive vicariously as a secondary target to trauma. Compassion fatigue is experienced by those in a helping profession: doctors, nurses, counselors, therapists, police officers, and maybe even you. If your unpaid role is that of a helping professional, then you may also be affected by compassion fatigue. If you are the middle of the night phone answerer or helping a friend through addiction or anxiety, if you are raising children or caring for parents, or maybe both at the same time, if your unpaid role is that of a helping profession, compassion fatigue could be affecting you as well. Now, what puts you at a greater risk for compassion fatigue is empathy. Those generally in a helping profession have a very strong empathetic response system. And empathy is that ability to pick yourself up and put yourself in someone else's shoes and get it, really get where they're coming from. The problem with empathy is you don't get to decide when to jump out. And those traumas that they experience begin to change you. I remember when I was the supervisor of a therapeutic group home, and I was sitting down with one of my clients. She began to tell me the horrific and painful stories of her past. And as she laid out in detail what she had experienced, my cell phone began to vibrate. And I wanted to show her that I was listening and I cared about every word she said. So I picked it up and I silenced it and I put it back down and I continued to listen. From that day forward, every single time I picked up my cell phone, swiped to silence it, I was transported back to her trauma. My brain had created a PTSD related symptom that transported me back to her situation every single time for years. Now, this would be pretty normal if it happened that day after work at the grocery store, or maybe even a week or 2 weeks later. But where we get concerned that maybe this trauma is starting to change you is when it's sticking around for 4 weeks, 6 weeks, and maybe even longer. Now, for many years, compassion fatigue was confused. People called everything burnout until Dr. Charles Figley came around in the late 80s and 90s and began to do research. We called it burnout. But the truth is there's a significant difference between burnout and compassion fatigue. Burnout has to do with being worn out and tired and just flat out not liking your job anymore. Compassion fatigue has to do with being afraid. Compassion fatigue begins to change your hardwiring, change who you are. We see this a lot in child protective service workers. They start to become overly vigilant, believing that everyone is out to hurt them and their family. When I think of this, I can't help but think of the nurse who came after one of my classes and said, still to this day, she can see the broken bones of the young man who was abused by his parents. That still today, she knows the smell of death from a patient who laid in bed dying. These memories, they do not just go away, and they begin to change you. But we like to make excuses because we think we're superhuman. So we say things like, I'm fine. I'm a professional. I can deal with the stress. In fact, it doesn't even stress me out. My famous talk off was, I've been doing this for 15 years. I know most people think it's stressful, but I'm okay. The problem with that is when stress and trauma start to affect you, your brain and your body, they do not pull for your opinion. And they will start to show signs and symptoms because your body and your brain are shouting at you, I am not okay. I cannot handle the trauma. In little ways, whether you start to have sleep problems, either you're sleeping all the time or not able to sleep at all. Another way it manifests is becoming a workaholic. Now, I know plenty of you in this room think, Amy, there's nothing wrong with being a workaholic. Get off my toes. Let me tell you why it may be a problem. Because when we start to feel like we are losing control of the world around us, what we do is we roll up our sleeves and we work a little harder. And I can work hard enough to make this trauma go away. Another sign and symptom is feeling unappreciated and under-resourced, like what you have is not enough to get the job done. Now, I'm not saying that's not true. There's a very good chance you are indeed underappreciated. But when you started in this helping profession, or when you started helping your friend or your family member, did you know you were going to be underappreciated, but you said, it's okay. I want to do this anyway. It's okay. I love you enough. But then somewhere along the way, that is no longer okay with me. It is no longer okay that I am not thanked and that I don't have what I need to succeed. What that tells me is your circumstances, they didn't change. You did. Maybe you changed because of life. Maybe you changed because of maturity, but maybe you changed because of compassion fatigue. And the last symptom I want to talk with you about today is called self-entitlement. And self-entitlement is a justification of negative maladaptive behaviors because of the positive things you do. The best way I can picture putting this is most of us went to school and got a degree or a certification to be professionals at what we do. But the truth is, I'll let you in on a secret, that's not enough because we're overachievers. So we require little invisible badges to really be professionals. Let me tell you what these invisible badges look like. For social workers, I know it looks like this. I stayed up all night long helping Joe Smith at the hospital. Now I'm a real social worker. For some healthcare professionals, I know it looks like this. I worked 2 shifts in a row. Now I'm a real healthcare professional. Where this turns into self-entitlement is when it looks like this. I stayed up all night helping Joe Smith at the hospital. That's why I'm a little cranky today and biting everyone's heads off. I worked 2 shifts in a row. In fact, I worked 60 hours this week, so I'm getting wasted all weekend. We begin to justify the negative behaviors because of the positive things that we do. Now that I have thoroughly depressed you, I want to give you some good news. That compassion fatigue can be identified, arrested, and treated at any time. That you can begin this journey for post-traumatic growth, that you can be better after trauma than you ever were before. And the best way I can think of putting this is when you think of an airplane, you know that the stewardess tells you where those exits are, and then they begin to tell you to please put your mask on you first before assisting other people. Now, every time I travel for vacation with my family, I show the stewardess that I'm listening. I get the cue card out of the backseat pocket and I give eye contact. I'm almost the only person on the plane listening. And I show if the plane went down, I could save the plane. I'm real intense about it. And yet it never fails. Every time they finish, they come over to me and they say, "Excuse me, if there were a change in cabin pressure, what would you do?" And I'm a little offended. I don't know why they asked me that. But you see, that flight attendant, they see something you don't. They see the carry-ons that I travel with. They see this. They do see me, and they see this. You see, that flight attendant knows that no matter how much I listen to her, that I will put their masks on them first before caring for myself. But you see, she also knows that no matter how much of a supermom I believe I am, that I cannot live without oxygen. And yet every single day we do the same thing. I put your mask on you, and your mask on you, and your mask on you. And I don't care for myself. But you see, we can only give what we have. We give out of who we are. And if I don't care for myself, I certainly cannot care for you. So I'm going to ask you to complete a piece of homework for me. And I'm going to ask that you please do this every single day for the rest of your life. I have big expectations. I'm going to ask that you take 10 minutes just for you. 10 minutes to put your mask on you first. 10 minutes to pray or meditate, to exercise or take a walk. But 10 minutes to care for you first. Take 10.
How does that help people identify?
Yes. You just click on it. Did it. Good job. So work-related trauma exposure, how does it affect us? It can look like all of these things listed on the PowerPoint: vicarious trauma, empathic strain, PTSD, critical incident stress, burnout, indirect trauma, and secondary traumatic stress. So I'm going to ask you to go to the next one. Okay. I was someone that I was like, I can do this job. It doesn't bother me. I don't feel bad for the stories. I don't want to bring any of my kids home. I can tell my story. It doesn't bother me. I'm good. And then there's a book called Trauma Stewardship. And this picture is in the front of it. And I read it on my way to Washington, D.C. to do a national training with Annalena. And I got up to the training and our executive director was there. And I said, "Melanie, I have all of these things." And she's like, what? And I said, "The secondary trauma book. I have all the symptoms." And she goes, "I don't know, Megan. That's not like a wave your flag, be proud of yourself thing." And so that's when I realized, like, I need a break. I need to take care of me and I need to do something too. And then as time went on, I was like, oh, like I really have some trauma. And I had been doing the work for 5 years at this point, I think. So this is 5 years of untreated secondary trauma, all unrolled at once. And I'm like, oh crap. There was so much secondary trauma in our work with the task force that they came up with a program called RST, where we are given access to therapists to talk about our experiences at work. And then, of course, I'm like, well, what about their therapist? Who do they see? And then who's the other therapist? And like, who's the grand therapist of all of them? Right? but that's not my responsibility. My responsibility is to care for me. And what I have to tell myself is if I'm not there, who does that serve, right? I lived a long time thinking I'm the only one that can do my job. I didn't have trust in my coworkers. I didn't have trust in my peers. But guess what? I take sick leave and they all still survive. They do just fine. So figuring out what you're trying to justify and why, and address that. So some symptoms, I can't read those.
Oh, some of the symptoms, trouble, I look at the thing, trouble concentrating, guilt, being angry, sadness, hopelessness, loss of appetite. Have you seen yourself in this little, I call it the peacock feathers, you know? Have you had pain, breathing problems? It can be something internal, it can be external. About 1,000 years ago when I became a nurse, I've been around for a while, we used to debrief after every code, especially a pediatric code. And same thing when I was a firefighter, we would debrief. And as the years and the decades have gone through, we stopped doing that. And then it took the RST program, which literally saved my life in so many ways. It's like, holy crap, I wore those invisible badges that, Amy Cunningham talked about. And sometimes the badge pops up, I'm not gonna lie. They'll pop up and I feel like I need to do this. But as Megan says, if I go on vacation, the ship's still running. And if I didn't get to do the PowerPoint or get my data in or do whatever it is that I needed to do, I'm only concentrating on the things that I can do at that moment. Be a better provider, to be a better colleague, to be a better human. But it takes, I'm going to say it takes courage to admit that. You talk to some of my law enforcement personnel and they'll tell you, I'm fine, totally fine, no big deal. And what we see when we go on sexual assault response teams and we deal with trafficking victims, the stories we hear are not for movies, basically. And so you got all that information. What do you do with that? And I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir on that. And so understanding, when she said burnout, PTSD, anxiety, all these things, there is a difference. Traumatic stress is bad. Vicarious trauma, uber bad. And vicarious trauma, when we do the work that we do, we sometimes create vicarious trauma amongst each other. And we do that unintentionally. I had a horrible assault. And I was with my colleagues and I stepped out and I came back in and it was bad and involved a pediatric client. And I remember my colleague, I was like, what's wrong? And I'm like, oh, and I started telling the story. And she's like, go grab a bottle of water and we'll walk it outside. And I'm like, no, I need to tell a story. And she's like, they don't need to hear the story. And I'm like, eh. And so we walked. And what she did was she calmed me down. But the vicarious trauma, had I not dealt with it, as Megan said, can just build and build and build. Like I still go on vacation and wonder where would the helicopter land in case something happens. There's some things I still do. I have to unwind, but it's just years and years and years of being in that world. Kind of touch on that. So some examples in your personal life, things of, are you experiencing vicarious trauma? Physical stuff that are mentioned here, being sick all the time, the emotional thing. Every time I look at the slide, I'm like, oh, I got that. So, and we do, I don't know if you do that, but I do. Yeah. And so I'm like, this kind of, anytime I do this type of training, I'm like, am I feeling this? Do I need to check myself again? Are these things that are going on? And this is I think it's a continuous struggle, don't you?
Yeah, and I think it's important that you have colleagues that you trust and can rely on for those things. There was a long time that I was like, Annalena, I am not going to read your emails that come after 5 because that is my boundary. Stop doing it. I can't make her stop sending me emails, but I can communicate like for myself, I'm not doing that. Then like if I am responding to emails after 5, like consistently, Annalena knows like what's happening to Megan that she's doing this. And we can call each other out. Melissa, who you listened to earlier, I've worked with her since the inception of this. When we start thinking every man in this world is a buyer or a trafficker, like what's happening? Like, we need to come back because that's simply not true. And so our beliefs and our experiences are then coming out into the world in a negative way and not helpful.
Yeah. And so, at work too, this can happen and we can see this. And this, I encourage everyone to, I don't want to say I encourage everyone to have a therapist, but I encourage people to look into the resiliency um, uh, program that's here in North Dakota that we're very fortunate to have. And it's free for, I forgot how many sessions, but 12 sessions. And it's just helpful because when it's happening in your personal life, it's going to bleed into your professional life. I always laugh and chuckle and be like, oh, I got taken care of by Nurse Ratchet. Well, Nurse Ratchet, when she first started, was a pretty cool nurse. So something's going on. Something, either it's the trauma that she's seeing. I mean, I worked at level 1 trauma centers all my life. What you see is horrible. And then if you don't have a good, healthy outlet, we're not encouraged. We don't do a good job in taking care of ourselves. I feel like medical care should be free for all healthcare providers. We shouldn't pay loans. Vote for me for the next presidency. But there are things that we don't do for ourselves in this field. And that's why it's important that we do that, because all this stuff will bleed into our work and that will eventually affect the patient, the victim, the client. So that's super important. I want you just to reflect that, knowing and hearing all this, have you experienced a little bit of stress? And just think about those and some of these signs. And do you need a vacation? And it doesn't mean that you need to go to Hawaii. It'd be awesome.
I would go.
That should be free. Just go get your nails done if you can. Go walk. I have 2 dogs. Those are my therapy. Find something, or just play Candy Crush. I don't care what it is. Something.
I play phase 10, or every day when I get off work, I go home, and to separate my work brain from my home brain, I do a crossword puzzle.
Yep. And yeah. And you know what? There is some benefit to that. She won't have a stroke, as she keeps
I
doing
know, I'm doing
brain things. So this self-care contemplation from a healthcare provider also applies also to law enforcement and to any of the fields that we're in. And I'm going to read it out loud. After 20 years in the medical profession, I've seen the personal effects of the transition from well-meaning healthcare provider healer to cynical provider to fully jaded human being. I've seen in myself an increasing lack of compassion. I simply don't like or care about people as much anymore. And I see the same thing in many others around me. Far too many healthcare professionals are losing themselves in the profession they love. So true. Insert social worker, police officer, whomever. And so it's important that, the work that we do, all that learning you're sitting through right now, 4 hours worth of learning, it's going to take a number on you. It's going to take its toll on you. So I can't draw, so I love stick figures. Who's got your back? As Megan said, she's got some trusted people. I trust my 4-legged creatures a lot. I just told her I went on vacation and I wanted to be where there was not a lot of people. It's not that I don't like people, but I know that I need to just decrease my stimulation. And it's taken me 30 some years and tons of experiences and good colleagues to say, hey, listen, you need to work on yourself a little bit or make a change in your life. So it's important to figure out who is that person, who is that human, and are there other humans you can talk to so you don't cause vicarious trauma to the human that you're always going to? Because who's the person?
Yeah, I want to know who the grand.
Yep. But it's important to say, hey, I'm thinking about you, or checking in on you. So how should we care for them, which is our patients, and for ourselves?
So some strategies that we want you to leave with and go forth and prosper in peace and blessings and all of those good things. Acceptance of your own feelings. You're not going to like everybody. There's patients that you're going to be annoyed with, that you don't want to see. They're going to be frequent flyers. Maybe they have a weird smell about them, all sorts of things. But that goes back to that golden rule of being nice, planting that seed that someone can be nice to them. And who knows, you might see them 12 years later in a whole different light. We work with a Homeland Security agent. He used to be a police officer in the city that I grew up in. And I was talking to him about this house that I stayed in back then. And he goes, Megan, I was at that house all the time. And I said, yeah, I know. And he goes, this is not that. And I was like, yeah, I know. Someone was nice to me once. I didn't actually say someone was nice to me, but I'm trying to like prove an aesthetic for you. Self-care and stress management, setting limits. It's okay to say no. You don't have to be everywhere all the time. That is also a trauma response, that appeasement that we talked about, saying yes because you feel like you have to, even though you don't want to, because you don't want someone to be mad at you or you don't want conflict. Strong training and supervision. It's important that you have supervisors that care, that look out for you. And if you are a supervisor, that you care and look out for your staff. It's easier to just consistently check in on them than ignore everything for 6 months and then have something blow up and all of a sudden things go crazy. Limiting exposure. So that vicarious trauma we talked about, I'm not going to call Annalena every single time something really tragic happens with one of my kids. I have people to go through for that. I have a therapist. I have supervisors. Yeah, we can talk about mutual client stuff, but we're not always going into the down and dirty. And celebrate small wins. Maybe someone came back. Maybe you got them to take a medication that they wouldn't take before. It doesn't have to be like we cured cancer, which I mean, that'd be really great, but it can be small victories. We got 5 stitches in, yay, or they sat through the whole process. So celebrate those things too.
And celebrate the fact that if you at the end of shift and you're handing off and you say, today I got to spend 2 more minutes time with a patient and figured out that stuff was going on at home. Or again, these are all basic things that we learn because we're trying to bring quality back to bedside. You know, as Megan said, and as we've said, this trauma is going to exist whether we're in this work or not. And disasters are going to be happening. Traumas are going to happen. Unprofessional things, professional things, everything's going to happen. We call ourselves helping professionals. I loved Ms. Cunningham when she said that. We have to explore ways to remain healthy because the work that we do, everything that we taught you, you guys can do probably so well because you're following a protocol, you got a tool, you got indicators. But how do you feel about this? How are you handling this? Because if you're just going through the motions, it ain't gonna work. And they're gonna read you in like half a second. And if they see that you're just doing this to do this, they're gonna leave or never come back. So think about and share with you, like, what is a self-care strategy, activity, or tool? Like, do you have, I remember back in the day, we used to have massage therapists. I was remembering this, who used to come to the ER and offer free massages. That was so great. Why did we let go of that? Or we would have time to eat lunch. Like, I don't even know where the break room is. Lunch, I eat it out of an emesis basin. I know it sounds horrible. It was a clean one, but you know, standing up, eating, going to the next thing. I have to actually break away from my desk because sitting is the new smoking with everything that's happening, to go walk where I'm at right now. And now I'm going to the treadmill at home. I get my nails done. There's little things that you can do just for yourself, right? So they stress a lot. We stress a lot. Personal self-care strategies. What do you do?
I get my nails done. I have a running appointment every 2 to 3 weeks that I get my nails done. And I do my crossword puzzles and play Phase 10. And I have a couple of dogs that, although sometimes they get like different, like their behavior changes and I assume something's wrong with me. And I'm a hypochondriac and I need to go to the doctor because Milo cuddles and he doesn't cuddle. So
Thumbs up.
so
Thumbs up.
self-sabotage.
That's awesome. So the thing is that go back to your facilities and say, hey, we used to do potlucks, or we used to do stuff together. We used to do these things. They don't have to be expensive. You can be creative. Pinterest it, for God's sake. Look, there's different ways, because again, this is all the stuff we've taught you. If you're not good inside, you're not going to be able to do this in the professional life. And we've made it a point in our trainings to include this piece because it was becoming an issue. It definitely did for me. And I've been a nurse for a really long time, but give me a good cardiac, give me a good trauma, and I'm all there. But then afterwards, I'm like, whoa,
And if you don't think you can take the time for yourself, I, at YouthWorks, I'm president of the fund committee. So I am not going to take the time myself to like do an activity for myself. But when I know I'm responsible for our office to do that together, it gets self-care done for everybody and it gets it done for me. So maybe you become president of your fund committee.
And you get to know your staff more.
Mhm.
So in closing, as we're closing up with this next couple of slides, there is a huge lack of awareness and understanding. And Megan and I are research geeks, as is Melissa too. And there's so much research out there, but there's not the best practice. We pull, right? We pull from, and we pull from our survivors too. But even our survivors, everyone's experience is so different. Everyone is vulnerable. Every single person, all age groups. And so we have to come up with different kinds of protocols and ways of doing things. So I challenge you to look at your organization, look at your health system. Do you need more specialized training? Do you need more education on certain things? What we do for the task force is free. So take advantage of that. You have national resources, but you also have statewide resources. And as you saw in the numbers that we presented, we have very specific issues to North Dakota that can be addressed, and prevention is the big key. Our victims and survivors distrust people, they distrust law enforcement, don't see themselves, they see themselves as not as victims, but they see themselves as criminals or not worthy.
Mhm.
And so we have to kind of bridge that gap. So as healthcare providers, I'm gonna let you do this because it's all about,
So
Yeah.
what do you do? What can you do to kind of counteract some of these negative things or more challenging things? Awareness of your demeanor and nonverbals. So standing with your arms crossed, or men sitting with their legs open is like relaxing to them, but it can be very threatening to a 15-year-old girl that has a lot of sexual assault. So just being mindful, being aware of those things. Assume that all situations are triggering. And that doesn't mean it's your fault, but it just teaches you to be mindful and watch for, changes in breathing, hyperactivity, different responses. Maybe they just like flipped the lid for no reason and told you to kick rocks, but they were doing really well before. Back up and think about what was happening right before that moment. Does your organization have a written policy for serving trafficking victims? If they do have a written policy, is it survivor informed? Best practice has everything being survivor led and survivor informed in this movement. It's vital, and it has to be intentional. You can't just like call a survivor and say like stamp this and say it's good. You have to be willing to engage and listen and accept recommendations. Refrain from making judgments about prostitutes or jokes on prostitution. The P word is like, it makes me flinch to this day, because what is a prostitute? What is our society's vision of what a prostitute looks like, what they do? They have portrayed it very much as a choice, very much as dirty. We already feel those things. I don't need a name that represents that as well, right? Like I'm already working through that. Don't assume this is what people want. I don't know any little kid that when they were little, you said, what do you want to be when you grow up? And they said, I want to be a prostitute. I'm going to have sex with strangers for money or drugs or places to stay, right? So thinking back to, these are all people that were children once. They're all people that had families at one point, whether it was a good family, a bad family, an indifferent family. They're humans just like you. Just because they have experienced something really traumatic or they're from another country doesn't mean that this is great or better for them or worse.
Exactly. A trauma-informed, victim-centered, patient-centered just requires all healthcare providers to bring their own consciousness into this too. It's really important that you are in tune with your unconscious, how do you see things? Look at the patterns. We were all taught this in our assessment classes, and in this training that you're having and all the other kinds of trainings that you have. We can spot, I can smell strep. I know when someone's having a cardiac event. I know when they're having a AAA, and I am very proud that I have that education. We should do that as well. for trafficking clients, for exploited clients, for clients who are victims of crime. We have to look at a different lens, open our eyes a little more, have a different approach, look at, because this, and then be sure that we're okay too. Are we able to handle this? It's okay to hand it off to somebody else. I've had to hand off clients to someone else because I'm like, I can't do it. It's triggering me and I need to figure it out. Sometimes they'll tell me stories just to see if I react. And I'm like, trying to keep that poker face, but inside I'm like, this is not good. This is not good. When I go to the women's prison, I literally have to take the long way home and get a Slurpee, even in the
What
winter
flavor do
time.
you get?
A Coke. I go Coke.
Mm.
I do Coke. And I get a Slurpee because I need that. That's my way of just calming down so that I can approach the world. But that's taken me a long time to figure out. Before I would just go from trauma to trauma to trauma to trauma to do, and that's not good. But if you cut yourself, I'll be able to fix it. I'll be able to sew
With
it
my hair.
with your hair. Yep.
One other thing I want to highlight on that slide is
Oh,
be
sorry.
aware of your unconscious bias. They're unconscious because you don't know what they are, but pay attention to yourself. Do you have a bias against LGBTQIA plus? I've on call, I've gotten a couple calls recently that they're not referring to this person's identified gender. They continue to refer to their biology. So just being aware, like maybe I shouldn't work with this person, or maybe someone else should. Poverty, race, different demographics, things like that. Just being mindful of that. And it's okay to identify that or work on that or whatever feels good for you.
Self-awareness, knowing what your practice, being self-aware. I mean, for example, for me, on a helicopter, there was a lot of trauma. So for me, one of my dearest friends died from a DUI. She was hit by a DUI. I, to this day, cannot take care of a client that is really drunk. But I go in there sometimes and I'm like, okay, I work past that. And again, sometimes, and I've had to take classes just how to figure that out because, you know, everyone has a story. Not everyone is a killer. Again, it's going back to that trauma and all that kind of stuff. We need to be prepared to make the appropriate referrals. We need to continuously be educated on everything that we do. We do it for our practice, right? I've just got all my CEUs for my credentialing. We need to do this for victims of crime or sexual assaults and all that. So we've got to be prepared. There's a lot of lessons.
So be aware of how you speak. Be aware to what you're saying to individuals. Language has power. It has way more power than you know. It can either dehumanize someone or it can be empowering for them and really make an impact and make a difference in how they view themselves. So there's a language associated with trafficking that is very specific to that lifestyle or that life. Don't try to say it because we will think you're ridiculous. I don't want to speak for all survivors. I would have thought you were ridiculous. But just know, like saying like you're a lot lizard or a streetwalker or any of those negative terms, even if they just slip out, can really make or break your relationship. So you stick to uplifting, powerful words that make someone, again, feel human and just be nice to them.
Yeah, it's that golden rule that we all grew up with at the very beginning, because as Megan said, we all grew up good. I do believe that everyone's, I'm going to use her term, a nugget, a gold nugget. Everybody's a gold nugget. It's just that some stuff happened along the way to not make them golden. Everyone has that potential. And then, yes, there are some people who genetically, we all know the science, blah, 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 but the art of medicine, medicine is a science and an art. We got the science part, right? We all do, because if not, we wouldn't be here, right? The art of what we do is all the stuff that we've talked about, to include yourself, taking care of yourself. We have to always mention, because people are like, well, now what do I do? And we'll have resources available to you online and also in written form. We'll make sure that you get those. But 911, you know, you need to report these. We talked about the 960s. We talked about mandated reporting, calling law enforcement, and also the tip line. It's anonymous. It's worked. I've seen it work. Just having a name or a suspicion is always helpful. And then also our hotline numbers. The National Human Trafficking Hotline. They have a call number, a text number, a live chat, and the same thing with the National Domestic Violence Hotline. Somebody always knows these numbers. And there's always a human, which is what I like about answering that phone call. It's not like press 1 if, press 2 if, because that right now for me drives me nuts anyways. I can't imagine someone who's in a bathroom like Megan said, or with no windows, or I'm not going to press a freaking number. I don't have time. Okay, so that's really cool how all these options are available. So as you're discussing with each other, as you're talking to your supervisors, you're talking amongst yourself, think about your concerns. What are we doing right? And how can we expand on it? Do we need further training? Should we invite more people to come and do this training? Should we have we had experiences? What did we do? Do we know the outcome? Should we look at the way we triage? Should we look at the ways that we do our screening, or create that pair environment that, establishing that positive rapport in those 3, 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes that we have. Like I said, my office is south of the Naval as a forensic nurse. But while I'm in there, I'm saying, so what's going on? Yes, my pelvics take a little longer, but I'm asking a couple of questions in the back of my mind, just in case, so that person knows I'm a safe person, or one of our forensic nurses is a safe person. It only takes a couple of minutes. It honestly does. So this is our contact information. Megan is here in Fargo. I'm in the West, and you have Melissa's, and we'll have all our stuff available to you on the website as well. So thank you very much for your time.